The moment the billionaire Dominic Ashford stood before the grand piano in Celestine's dining hall and declared, "Play this song perfectly, and I'll marry you," the entire room held its breath. No one expected the quiet, invisible waitress in the corner to stand up, and no one expected what would happen when her fingers touched those keys. But that moment was still to come. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Nora Hayes had learned to make herself small. At 24, she moved through the glittering halls of Celestine like a shadow, silent, unnoticed, forgettable. The restaurant sat perched on the waterfront of Harlington Bay, where floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked sailboats and sunset-stained waves. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light over tables draped in ivory linen, where the city's wealthiest came not just to eat, but to be seen. Nora was not meant to be seen. She kept her auburn hair pulled back in a tight bun, her eyes downcast, her voice barely above a whisper when taking orders. The other servers called her the mouse behind her back, sometimes to her face. They laughed when she stumbled over words, rolled their eyes when she asked to switch sections away from the louder tables. Honestly, how did she even get hired? One of the senior waitresses, Claudia, muttered during the evening shift as Nora tied her black apron with trembling fingers. "She can barely speak to customers without looking like she'll faint." Another server snickered. Maybe management felt sorry for her. Nora heard every word. She always did. But she had learned long ago that defending herself only made things worse. So she tied the apron tighter, picked up her notepad, and walked toward the dining room with her head down and her heart heavy. Tonight was different, though. Tonight, Celestine had been rented out entirely for a private event. Dominic Ashford's memorial gala. The name alone carried weight in Harlington. Ashford Industries owned half the tech startups in the region and had investments stretching across 3 continents. Dominic himself was only 34, but he had the kind of presence that made boardrooms fall silent. Tall, sharp-featured, with dark hair touched by early silver at the temples and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore his wealth like armor, custom suits, polished shoes, a watch that cost more than most people's cars. But tonight, beneath the perfectly tailored exterior, there was something broken. His wife, Julianne, had died 6 months ago. A car accident on a rainy October night. The city had mourned publicly, charity funds in her name, news articles celebrating her philanthropy, social media tributes from people who had never met her. But for Dominic, the grief was private, suffocating, relentless. And it had shattered his 7-year-old daughter, Violet. Violet Ashford sat at the head table beside her father, a small figure in a lavender dress, her blonde curls pinned back with a silver clip. She used to be bright, talkative, full of laughter that echoed through their penthouse. Now she barely spoke. The trauma counselor called it selective mutism, a response to unbearable loss. She would communicate occasionally with her father through nods or written notes, but to the rest of the world, she had gone silent. Tonight, she sat with her hands folded in her lap, staring at the untouched plate of food in front of her while donors and business associates swirled around the room, offering Dominic condolences that felt rehearsed and hollow. Nora was assigned to their table. Her stomach knotted as the floor manager handed her the assignment. Table 1. The Ashford party. Do not mess this up. She nodded, gripping her tray so hard her knuckles turned white. As she approached, she saw Dominic lean down toward Violet, whispering something. The little girl didn't respond, didn't even look up. The pain in his eyes was raw, unguarded for just a moment before he straightened and pulled the mask back into place. Nora's chest ached. She recognized that look. The look of someone trying desperately to reach someone they loved, only to be met with silence. She knew that feeling all too well. As the evening unfolded, Nora moved quietly between tables, refilling glasses, clearing plates, staying invisible. She did not know yet that by the end of the night, invisibility would no longer be an option. She did not know that the grand piano in the corner, the one she had been carefully avoiding all evening, was about to change everything. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The evening had stretched into its 3rd hour when Dominic Ashford stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the polished floor. The conversations around the dining hall dimmed as heads turned toward him. He walked to the center of the room where a Steinway grand piano sat beneath a spotlight, its black surface gleaming like still water. Nora paused mid-step, a wine bottle balanced in her hand, her pulse quickening without knowing why. Dominic's voice carried across the room, steady, but edged with something raw. Most of you knew my wife, Julianne. You knew her kindness, her brilliance, the way she could light up a room. He paused, his jaw tightening. What many of you didn't know was that she played piano. Beautifully. There was one piece she loved above all others, Clair de Lune. She played it the night I proposed. She played it the day Violet was born. His hand rested on the piano's edge, fingers trembling slightly. Since she's been gone, I haven't been able to listen to it. Violet hasn't heard music at all. But tonight. His voice cracked, then steadied. Tonight, I want to hear it again. I need to. The room was utterly silent. Dominic's storm gray eyes swept across the crowd. So here's my offer, and I mean every word. If anyone here can play Clair de Lune, play it the way Julianne did, with soul, not just technical precision, I will grant them anything they ask. Anything. A business partnership. A donation to their cause. He paused, his voice dropping to something almost desperate. Or if they're unmarried, my hand in marriage. Gasps rippled through the room. Someone laughed nervously. A woman in diamonds whispered to her companion, "He can't be serious." But Dominic's expression said otherwise. Several guests stood, eager to try. A venture capitalist who'd taken lessons as a child fumbled through the opening measures before stopping, embarrassed. A socialite made it further, but her playing was mechanical, lifeless. Each attempt ended the same way, polite applause, but Dominic's face remained stone, unmoved. Violet hadn't looked up once. Nora stood frozen near the kitchen doors, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. Her fingers trembled against the wine bottle. She knew that piece. She knew it better than she knew her own heartbeat. But she couldn't. She shouldn't. Claudia appeared beside her, smirking. "What's wrong, Mouse?" "Thinking of trying." She laughed cruelly. "Please. You can't even take an order without stuttering." Nora's throat tightened. She turned to leave, to disappear into the safety of the kitchen. Then she heard it. A small, broken sound. Violet had lifted her head. Her blue eyes, so much like her mother's, Nora imagined, were wet with tears. She was staring at the piano as if it held every memory she couldn't bear to touch. And something inside Nora snapped. She set down the wine bottle. Her hands were shaking, her breath shallow, but her feet moved before her mind could stop them. She walked across the dining hall, every eye turning toward her. Whispers erupted. "Is that the waitress? What is she doing?" Dominic looked up sharply as Nora approached the piano bench. His brow furrowed in confusion. "Miss, this isn't. I'd like to try." Her voice was barely audible, but it cut through the murmurs like a knife. Silence fell. Dominic studied her. This small, trembling woman in a server's uniform who looked like she might shatter at any moment. "Do you even know the piece?" Nora nodded, unable to speak further. He stepped aside, skepticism written across his face. Around the room, guests exchanged glances. Someone scoffed. Claudia covered her mouth, eyes wide with secondhand embarrassment. Nora sat down on the bench. Her fingers hovered above the keys. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. The last time she'd played publicly, everything had fallen apart. The last time she'd touched a piano, it had cost her everything. But then she looked at Violet, and she began to play. The first notes floated into the air like whispered secrets, soft, delicate, aching with beauty. Nora's fingers moved across the keys with a fluidity that seemed impossible for someone so hesitant in speech. The music swelled, each phrase breathing with emotion, with memory, with longing. The room disappeared. There was only the music. Dominic's breath caught in his chest. His eyes widened, then closed as the melody washed over him. It wasn't just technically perfect. It was alive. It was Julianne's spirit flowing through someone else's hands. And Violet turned her head toward the piano. Her lips parted. A tear slipped down her cheek. Then another. As Nora played the final, fading notes, the silence that followed was deafening. No one moved. No one breathed. Then Violet stood. She walked slowly toward the piano, her small hand reaching out to touch Nora's sleeve. And she spoke. That was Mama's song. Her voice was hoarse from months of silence, but it shattered the room like thunder. Dominic's face went white. He staggered backward, hand pressed to his mouth, tears streaming down his face. The crowd erupted, gasps, applause, shocked exclamations. But Dominic couldn't hear any of it. He was staring at Nora as if she'd just raised the dead. And in a way, she had. 3 days after the gala, Nora sat across from Dominic Ashford in a quiet corner booth of the Harborview Cafe, a place far removed from the glittering world of Celestine. Rain streaked down the windows, blurring the gray waters of the bay beyond. Her hands wrapped around a ceramic mug of tea she hadn't touched, while Dominic leaned forward, his gray eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her want to disappear. "I need to understand," he said quietly. "A waitress who plays like that doesn't happen by accident." Nora had known this conversation was coming. After Violet's first words in months, after the room had erupted in shock and wonder, after Dominic had looked at her as if she held the answer to every prayer he'd whispered into the dark, she had known she couldn't hide anymore. She drew a slow breath and began. "I wasn't always a waitress," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. 5 years ago, I was a student at the Riverside Conservatory. Piano performance. Full scholarship." Dominic's eyebrows lifted slightly. Riverside was one of the most prestigious music schools on the East Coast. "My father was a music teacher," Nora continued, staring into her tea. "He taught middle school orchestra in a town so small most people have never heard of it. He wasn't famous. He didn't perform in concert halls. But he loved music the way some people love breathing. He taught me to play when I was 4 years old." A faint smile ghosted across her lips. "I used to sit on his lap while he played, my little hands trying to mimic his. He said I had a gift, but more than that, I had heart. That music wasn't about perfection. It was about truth." Her smile faded. "When I was 19, I auditioned for Riverside. Full ride. My father cried when I got the letter. He said it was the proudest moment of his life." She paused, her throat tightening. "He died 3 months later. Heart attack. Sudden. He was only 52. Dominic's expression softened. "I'm sorry." Nora nodded, unable to speak for a moment. When she continued, her voice was quieter. "I almost didn't go to Riverside. The grief was overwhelming. But my father's last words to me were play your heart out. So I went. I buried myself in practice rooms. 8, 10, 12 hours a day. The piano was the only place I could feel close to him. By my junior year, I was being called a prodigy. My professors said I had a future. Concert tours. Recording contracts. I was chosen to perform at the conservatory's annual gala, the event that every music industry executive attended. It was the kind of opportunity that could launch a career. Her hands tightened around the mug. That's when I met Garrett Pierce. He was a visiting composer, brilliant, charming. 20 years older than me, but he paid attention to me in a way no one else did. He said he saw my potential. He offered to mentor me, to help me prepare for the gala performance. Dominic's jaw tightened as if he already sensed where this was going. "I trusted him," Nora whispered. "Completely. He convinced me to change my entire repertoire 2 weeks before the gala. Said the pieces I'd chosen were too safe, that I needed something riskier to stand out. I was so desperate to succeed, to make my father proud, that I listened." She closed her eyes. The night of the performance, I walked onto that stage in front of 600 people. I sat at the piano, and when I began to play, I realized the sheet music he'd given me was wrong. Intentionally wrong. Notes in the wrong key. Rhythms altered. I tried to improvise, to fix it in real time, but I fell apart. I froze. I ran off stage in tears. Why would he do that? Dominic's voice was hard with anger. "Because a month earlier, I'd rejected his advances," Nora said flatly. "He told me I owed him for his mentorship. When I refused, he decided to ruin me." She laughed bitterly. "And it worked. The faculty didn't believe me. They said I choked under pressure, that I wasn't ready. My scholarship wasn't renewed. The industry stopped returning my calls." She finally met Dominic's eyes. "I left Riverside with nothing. No degree. No career. No music. I moved to Harlington because it was far enough away that no one knew me. I took the first job I could find. I told myself I'd never touch a piano again. Until 3 nights ago," Dominic said softly. "Until I saw your daughter's face," Nora corrected. "And I couldn't let another child lose their connection to music because of someone else's cruelty." The silence between them stretched, filled only with the sound of rain against glass. Dominic reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "You gave Violet her voice back. Do you understand that? You gave me hope I thought I'd lost forever. Nora's eyes filled with tears. I didn't do anything special. You did everything, he said fiercely. And whoever told you otherwise was a fool. For the first time in 5 years, Nora allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, her story wasn't over. The invitation came 2 days after their conversation at the cafe. Dominic's message was simple: Violet keeps asking for you. Would you consider visiting? No pressure. Nora stared at her phone for 20 minutes before typing back. When? That Saturday afternoon, she stood outside the Ashford penthouse in the Harbor Heights Tower, clutching a small bag of sheet music she'd printed from the library. The doorman had looked at her twice, clearly skeptical that someone in worn jeans and a faded cardigan belonged in a building where apartments cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Dominic answered the door himself, dressed casually in dark slacks and a charcoal sweater that made his eyes look even stormier. You came. I told Violet I would, Nora said softly. The penthouse was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay, minimalist furniture in shades of cream and gray, and in the corner of the living room, a black grand piano that gleamed under recessed lighting. But what caught Nora's attention was Violet, sitting cross-legged on the carpet surrounded by colored pencils and blank paper. When the little girl saw Nora, her face lit up with a smile that cracked something open in Nora's chest. You came to play? Violet's voice was still quiet, tentative, but it was there. I came to play with you, Nora corrected, kneeling down beside her. If you'd like. What began as one afternoon became 2, then 3, then a standing invitation every weekend. Nora would arrive Saturday mornings, and she and Violet would spend hours at the piano. Not rigid lessons, but exploration. Nora taught her simple melodies, let her improvise, encouraged her to play whatever she felt. Violet blossomed like a flower finally given sunlight. She started humming while drawing. She asked questions. She laughed, a sound Dominic confessed he thought he'd never hear again. And Dominic watched. He would sit in the armchair across the room, supposedly working on his laptop, but Nora felt his gaze on her constantly. When she'd glance up, sometimes she'd catch him staring with an expression she couldn't quite name. Gratitude mixed with something deeper, something that made her heart race and her breath catch. One evening, after Violet had gone to bed, Nora stayed to help clean up the scattered sheet music. She and Dominic moved around the living room in comfortable silence until their hands both reached for the same page. Their fingers brushed. Nora pulled back as if burned, but Dominic's hand caught hers gently. Wait. She froze, her pulse thundering in her ears. Thank you, he said quietly, his thumb tracing an unconscious circle on her wrist. For giving her back to me. I didn't do anything extraordinary, Nora whispered, though she didn't pull her hand away. You did the impossible. His voice dropped lower. And not just for her. The air between them felt charged, dangerous. Nora's rational mind screamed at her to step back, to remember who he was and who she wasn't. But her heart had already betrayed her weeks ago. She pulled her hand away carefully. I should go? It's late. Dominic didn't argue, but the disappointment in his eyes was unmistakable. Back at Celestine, the whispers had grown vicious. Word had spread about the mysterious waitress who spent weekends at the Ashford penthouse. Claudia led the charge with thinly veiled comments about gold diggers and women who know how to play a role. She probably researched his dead wife, one server muttered during a shift change. Learned the song on purpose. It's all calculated. Another laughed, as if someone like Dominic Ashford would actually fall for the mouse. He's probably just being charitable. She'll be discarded once he gets bored. Nora heard every word. Each one landed like a stone in her chest because part of her believed them. What was she thinking? That a billionaire would genuinely care about a failed musician working for minimum wage? That this wasn't just kindness that would eventually run its course? Yet every Saturday, when Violet threw her arms around her waist and Dominic looked at her like she was the answer to questions he'd stopped asking, she couldn't make herself stay away. One rainy afternoon, as Nora taught Violet a duet, Dominic joined them at the piano bench. Teach me too, he said. So Nora sat between them, guiding both their hands, trying to ignore how close Dominic was, how his shoulder pressed against hers, how his voice rumbled softly when he asked questions. When Violet ran off to get water, Dominic didn't move. You know you're not what they say you are. Nora's hands stilled on the keys. And what do they say? That you're using me. Using Violet. His jaw tightened. They're wrong. Are they? Nora turned to face him, her eyes welling with tears she refused to shed. Because I don't belong here, Dominic. This world, this life, it's not mine. And eventually, you'll see that too. What if I already see you exactly as you are? He said quietly. And what if that's exactly who I'm falling for? The words hung between them like a confession and a dare. Nora stood abruptly, grabbing her bag. I need to go. She left before he could see her cry. But she came back the next Saturday. And the one after that. Because despite every logical reason to run, her heart had already made a choice she was terrified to name. The envelope arrived at Dominic's office on a Tuesday morning, unmarked except for his name printed in neat block letters. Inside was a folder containing printed articles, photographs, and what appeared to be financial records. His assistant had left it on his desk with a note. This was delivered by courier. Marked confidential. Dominic opened it absently while reviewing quarterly reports, then stopped cold. The first page was a newspaper clipping from 5 years ago. Conservatory student accused of plagiarism in gala scandal. Below it, a photo of a younger Nora, tears streaming down her face as she fled a concert hall. His chest tightened as he read further. An anonymous letter claiming Nora had stolen compositions from Garrett Pierce, her mentor. Accusations that she'd fabricated the story about sabotage sheet music to cover her own failures. Statements from faculty members suggesting she'd been emotionally unstable and prone to delusion. Then came the financial records. Bank statements showing large deposits into an account under Nora's name, dated just before she left Riverside. The amounts were significant, $20,000 over 3 months. A handwritten note was paperclipped to the final page. Thought you should know who's really spending time with your daughter. Some people make careers out of playing the victim. A concerned friend. Dominic's hands trembled as he set the folder down. His mind raced through every interaction with Nora, replaying them through this new, darker lens. The coincidence of her knowing Julianne's favorite piece. Her presence at the gala. The way she'd inserted herself into Violet's life so quickly. No. He pressed his palms against his eyes. This couldn't be real. But the documents looked legitimate. The accusations detailed. And in his world, he'd learned the hard way that people would do anything for access to wealth and power. He called his head of security. I need you to run a complete background check on Nora Hayes. Everything. Financial records, employment history, references from Riverside Conservatory. I want it by tomorrow. That night, when Nora arrived for her usual Saturday visit, Dominic was waiting in the foyer instead of greeting her with his customary warmth. His expression was granite. We need to talk. Alone. Nora's smile faltered. Is Violet okay? She's with my mother. Come in. He led her to his study and closed the door. The folder sat on his desk like an accusation. Nora's eyes landed on it, and her face went pale. Where did you get that? Her voice was barely a whisper. Does it matter? I need you to explain these. He spread the articles across the desk. Plagiarism accusations. Faculty reports calling you a liar. And these bank deposits, $20,000 that appeared in your account right before you left Riverside. Where did that money come from, Nora? You investigated me? The hurt in her eyes cut deeper than any answer could. Answer the question. Those deposits were from Garrett, she said, her voice shaking. He tried to pay me to keep quiet about what he did. I never touched that money. I reported it to the school, but they said it proved I'd been in a relationship with him, which made my accusations seem like revenge. The account was frozen. I couldn't access it even if I wanted to. That's convenient, Dominic said coldly. No proof you didn't take it. Just your word against documented evidence. Nora stepped back as if he'd struck her. You don't believe me. I don't know what to believe anymore. His voice rose despite his attempt at control. You show up at my gala, play the exact song that would guarantee my attention, work your way into my daughter's life. Work my way in. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I tried to stay away. You invited me. Violet asked for me. And maybe that's exactly what you were counting on. A grieving billionaire. A traumatized child. The perfect targets for someone who... Stop. Her voice cracked. Just stop. She grabbed her coat with shaking hands. I told you about the worst moments of my life. I showed you my scars. I let you see me. She choked on a sob. And you think I'm running a con? Nora, wait. No. She turned at the door, her face streaked with tears. You're just like them. Like everyone at Riverside who chose to believe the lies because it was easier than believing me. I thought you were different. I thought you saw me. I'm trying to protect my daughter. From what? From someone who loves her. Nora's voice broke completely. I would never hurt Violet. Never. But you've already decided I'm guilty, so nothing I say matters. She walked out, and the door closing behind her sounded like an ending. Dominic stood frozen in his study, his heart hammering, his mind screaming that he'd just made a terrible mistake. But the documents on his desk stared back at him, whispering doubt. Over the following week, Violet asked for Nora every day. When Dominic explained that Nora couldn't visit anymore, Violet's face crumpled. She stopped speaking again, stopped eating properly, sat at the piano but wouldn't play. At night, Dominic lay awake replaying Nora's final words. The devastation in her eyes. The way her voice had broken when she said, "You don't believe me." He'd built an empire on calculated risks and verified facts. But what if this time, the numbers had lied? And what if he'd just destroyed the best thing that had happened to him and his daughter since Julian died? The notification appeared on Nora's phone 2 weeks after she'd walked out of Dominic's penthouse. She'd stopped crying days ago, had forced herself to pick up extra shifts at Celestine, had tried to convince herself that she'd survived heartbreak before and would survive it again. Then she saw the headline. Ashford Industries announces partnership with renowned composer Garrett Pierce for Youth Music Initiative. Her blood turned to ice. The article detailed how Garrett Pierce, now celebrated as one of the country's leading contemporary composers, would be collaborating with Ashford Industries to launch a scholarship program for underprivileged music students. The press conference and launch gala would be held at the Harlington Symphony Hall in 3 days. Nora's hands shook so violently she nearly dropped her phone. Garrett, in Dominic's orbit, close to Violet. She thought of the little girl who'd just started to heal, who'd found her voice again through music. The idea of Garrett anywhere near her made Nora feel physically ill. For 2 days, she agonized. She told herself it wasn't her problem anymore. Dominic had made his choice. He'd believed the lies, just like everyone else. But on the morning of the gala, she received an email. The sender was anonymous, but the attachment was a video file labeled "The Truth About Riverside." With trembling fingers, she pressed play. The footage was grainy, clearly recorded on someone's phone from the back of a practice room. The timestamp read 5 years ago, 2 days before her disastrous gala performance. In the video, Garrett Pierce stood over a music stand, deliberately altering sheet music with a pen while laughing to someone off camera. "She'll never see it coming," his voice said clearly. "Arrogant little brat thinks she can reject me? I'll make sure she never plays professionally again." The video cut off. Nora played it 3 more times, tears streaming down her face. Proof. After 5 years of carrying the weight of accusations and doubt, she finally had proof. The email contained one more line. "He's doing it again. There's a young intern at his studio. I can't stay silent anymore. Please stop him." A former student. Nora stood in her tiny apartment, staring at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Every instinct screamed at her to hide, to stay small, to protect herself. But then she thought of Violet's silence. Of all the years Nora herself had stayed quiet while lies defined her, she thought of the anonymous student who'd found the courage to send the video. And she made a choice. The Harlington Symphony Hall glittered with Harlington's elite. Dominic stood on stage beside Garrett Pierce, forcing a smile for cameras while his gut churned with unease. Something about Pierce felt wrong. Too smooth, too practiced. But the board had insisted this partnership would be good publicity, especially after the rumors about his unstable waitress. He scanned the audience out of habit and froze. Nora stood at the back of the hall in a simple navy dress, her hair down for once, her chin lifted. Their eyes met across the distance, and his heart stopped. Before he could move, Nora walked down the center aisle. Every head turned. Whispers erupted. "That's her. The waitress who? What is she doing here?" Garrett's smile faltered when he saw her. "Security. Let her speak." Dominic's voice cut through the murmurs. He didn't know why he said it, only that something in her eyes demanded it. Nora climbed the stage steps. A microphone was thrust into her hands by a confused sound technician. "My name is Nora Hayes," she began, her voice shaking but clear. 5 years ago, this man destroyed my career." She pointed at Garrett, whose face had gone white. "He sabotaged my senior recital at Riverside Conservatory because I refused his advances. Then he spread lies that I was a plagiarist, unstable, a liar. This is absurd, Garrett started. I have proof. Nora pulled out her phone, connecting it to the venue's display system with shaking hands. The video played on the giant screens flanking the stage. Garrett's voice echoed through the hall. She'll never see it coming. I'll make sure she never plays professionally again. Gasps erupted. Camera flashes exploded. Garrett stumbled backward, his polished composure shattering. You have no right. That's taken out of context. There's more, Nora continued, her voice growing stronger. Bank statements showing you deposited money in my name to frame me as your accomplice. Emails to faculty members planting seeds of doubt about my mental state. And testimonies from 3 other students you targeted the same way. She looked directly at Dominic. I didn't come here to humiliate anyone. I came because there's an intern at his studio right now going through what I went through. And I won't let another person's life be destroyed because I was too afraid to speak. The silence was deafening. Then Dominic stepped forward. His voice was steady, commanding. This partnership is terminated. Effective immediately. He turned to Nora, his eyes glistening. I'm sorry. God, Nora, I'm so sorry. I should have believed you. Before anyone could react, a small voice called out from the audience. Nora. Violet broke free from Dominic's mother's grip and ran toward the stage. Dominic caught her, lifting her up, but she was signing frantically. Nora's hands moved instinctively, signing back. The audience watched in stunned silence as the little girl and the woman communicated in graceful, silent understanding. Then Violet turned to the crowd and spoke aloud, her voice clear and certain. She taught me that being quiet doesn't mean you have nothing to say. And when you're ready, you should be loud. The applause started slowly, then built into a roar. Reporters surged forward. Security escorted a protesting Garrett Pierce out while he screamed about lawsuits that everyone knew would go nowhere. Dominic stood before Nora, Violet in his arms, his face raw with regret and something deeper. I failed you, he said quietly, just for her. I let fear make me cruel. But if you'll let me, I'll spend the rest of my life proving I see you. The real you. And she's extraordinary. Nora's tears fell freely now, but she was smiling. You really mean that? Play me a song, he whispered, and I'll marry you. Right now? I meant every word. Around them, the hall erupted in chaos and celebration. But in that moment, there were only 3 people who mattered. A man who'd learned to trust, a woman who'd found her voice, and a little girl who'd witnessed what courage truly looked like. 6 months later, the morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the Harlington Academy for Musical Arts, illuminating rows of pianos where children of all backgrounds sat practicing. Some wore expensive school uniforms. Others came from neighborhoods where music lessons had once been an impossible dream. Here, none of that mattered. Nora moved between the practice rooms, offering encouragement in 4 different languages, adjusting hand positions, answering questions with the patience of someone who remembered what it felt like to be scared and hopeful at the same time. The academy had been Dominic's idea, but Nora's vision. You gave Violet her voice back, he'd said the week after the gala, still apologizing daily for doubting her. Imagine how many others are waiting for the same gift. Garrett Pierce was awaiting trial on multiple counts of harassment, fraud, and professional sabotage. For more victims had come forward after Nora's public revelation. Riverside Conservatory had issued a formal apology and offered to reinstate her scholarship, but Nora had declined. That chapter of her life had closed. A better one had begun. Today was the Academy's grand opening celebration. The main performance hall was decorated with white ribbons and fresh flowers. Parents, donors, and press filled the velvet seats while students prepared backstage, nervous and excited. Violet stood beside Nora in the wings, wearing a rose-colored dress, her blonde curls pinned back with the same silver clip from that first night. She squeezed Nora's hand. Are you scared? Terrified, Nora admitted with a smile. But that's okay. Courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing it anyway, Violet finished, repeating the lesson Nora had taught her months ago. The ceremony began with speeches from city council members and board directors. Then Dominic took the stage, devastatingly handsome in a charcoal suit, his presence commanding immediate attention. This academy exists because one woman had the courage to stand on a stage and tell the truth when staying silent would have been safer, he began. Nora Hayes could have disappeared after what happened to her. Instead, she chose to fight, not just for herself, but for every student who'd ever been silenced, dismissed, or told they weren't enough. He gestured toward the wings. Nora, would you join me? Her heart hammered as she walked onto the stage, Violet following close behind. The applause was warm, genuine. Dominic took her hand. I have one more announcement, he said, his voice softening as he turned to face her fully. 6 months ago, I made you a promise in this very hall. I said if you played for me, I'd marry you. You played. You changed everything. He dropped to one knee. The audience gasped. Violet bounced on her toes, clearly in on the secret. Nora Hayes, you taught my daughter to speak again. You taught me to trust again. You taught both of us that love isn't about perfection. It's about showing up, even when you're scared. He pulled out a velvet box, revealing a ring that caught the stage lights. Will you marry me? Will you let us be your family? Nora's vision blurred with tears. She looked at Violet, who was signing enthusiastically. Say yes. Say yes. Yes, Nora whispered, then louder. Yes. The hall erupted. Dominic stood, sliding the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into a kiss that felt like coming home. Violet threw her arms around both of them, creating a circle of 3 that had once been broken but was now beautifully whole. Later, as the celebration continued and students performed pieces they'd learned in just 6 months, Nora stood at the back of the hall watching. Dominic's arm was around her waist, Violet between them holding both their hands. Do you ever think about how it all started? Dominic murmured. You, invisible in the corner of a restaurant. And you, offering marriage to a stranger who could play a song. Nora replied with a soft laugh. Best gamble I ever made. If you're still here with me after this journey, then you know this wasn't just a story about a waitress and a billionaire. It was about what happens when you find the courage to stop hiding. When you decide that your voice, whether spoken, played, or signed, deserves to be heard. Nora spent 5 years believing she was broken, that her story had ended on that stage at Riverside. But endings are just pauses before new beginnings. So if you're carrying shame about something that wasn't your fault, if someone told you you're too much or not enough, if you've been hiding your gifts because the world once punished you for sharing them, this is your reminder. You are not your worst moment. Every person who mocked Nora, who doubted her, who tried to keep her small, had to watch her rise. And the same will be true for you. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who's been silent too long. Someone who forgot they have a song worth singing. Subscribe if you believe in second chances. Comment where you're watching from. Become part of this community that knows redemption isn't just possible, it's waiting. Because like Nora discovered, sometimes the people who laugh at you in the beginning will have no choice but to stand and applaud when you finally show them who you really are. Your stage is waiting. It's time to play your song. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.